Hi, my name is James Nestor. I'm the author of Breath, The New Science of a Lost Art. I'd like to start off by saying how sad I am to not be with all you wonderful people at the Global Wellness Summit. Instead, I have to sit here once again in front of this laptop, in front of these fluorescent lights, speaking to you virtually. But these are anxious, crazy times, and what can you do? Luckily, breathing can help. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to take you through 1 million years of human evolution and explain why humans are the worst breathers in the world and what we can do about it. But before we get to all that, I'd like to explain how I, a science journalist, began to become so interested in this subject and why I spent so many years researching in this field. The jumping off point for me was about 8 or 9 years ago when I was sent by Outside Magazine to write about these people you're seeing here, freedivers. These freedivers had trained themselves to hold their breath for 7, 8, even 9 minutes at a time and plummet far below what scientists thought possible. They told me that when we hold our breath in freedive, we become part of the underwater environment. We can do things like this: plummet down a few hundred feet and dive face to face with sharks. We can dive with dolphins. And if we're lucky enough, we can dive with giant sperm whales. When I asked these freedivers how they were able to do what they did, they said it was easy. Anyone in reasonable health could do it. All you needed to do was learn the art of breathing. It was only by training yourself to breathe well that you could hold your breath for so long underwater. So, breathing practices can increase the size of our lungs by about 30%. And these freedivers told me stories of people who had used breathing to do some miraculous things. They told me about this guy who had been injected with E. coli and then breathed in a rhythmic pattern to stimulate his immune system to destroy the toxins within minutes. They told me about a 90-year-old who used breathing to superheat his body and sit in snow for hours. All of this stuff, of course, sounded completely crazy to me. But then for the next several years, I went out into the field and I found that so many of these crazy stories were actually real. They happened, the people were out there. It turns out that each of us take about 30 pounds of air in and out of our bodies every single day, far more than we eat or drink. And the new science of breathing was showing us that how we took all that air in and how we exhaled it determined so much of our health, our happiness, lifespan, and human potential. How we breathe was really a missing pillar of health. And it turned out that so many of us were breathing improperly or dysfunctionally. I didn't believe this at all when I first heard it. But then the scientists I was working with just showed me the data. In the US alone, about 9 to 10% of the population has asthma, about 20% suffers from chronic hyperventilation, 20% suffers from sleep apnea, on and on and on. So these poor breathing habits and respiratory problems can either exacerbate or in some cases cause a laundry list of chronic issues like increased risk of stroke, sinusitis, acid reflux, ADHD, and on and on and on. So I began to wonder, how did humans become so divorced from our most basic biological function? How did we evolve a trait that would become so detrimental to our health? The answers, I was told, could be found in ancient skulls. It turns out that our ability to take free and easy breaths in has changed, and all for the worse. I visited the Morton Collection at the University of Pennsylvania and found that the human mouth over the past few 300 or 400 years has grown so small that our teeth no longer fit. They grow in crooked instead. I also found something else. When I was in these labs, I was looking at these ancient skulls from 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, on and on and on. And it turns out that all of our ancestors had perfectly straight teeth. This is a jaw of one of the oldest Homo sapiens skulls. It's about 300,000 years old. No orthodontics, no Invisalign for this fellow. Perfectly straight teeth. This skull is even older, about 1 million years old. Look at this powerful forward growing face, this wide nose, and these perfectly straight teeth. Now let's fast forward. This skull is about 8,000 years old. And watch what happens as we go forward in time to about 2,000 years ago. The mouth grows more slender, the face grows more narrow. So teeth have nowhere to go. So they start growing in crooked. And this is what happens if we don't do anything about it. Our teeth can start to look like this. So there's another much more serious problem to this backward growth in our face, to having this mouth that's so small. It turns out that it also blocks our airways. This is what has happened to our profiles in the last few hundred years. Almost all of our ancestors were above that perpendicular line. Now, about 90% of us are behind it, so our profiles look more like this. Here's how this affects our breathing. Notice the airways here. When the face starts growing backwards and the mouth is so small, it can block our airways and cause all kinds of breathing problems. So we are the only species in the animal kingdom to suffer from this. Some different breeds of dogs like pugs and bulldogs, they also suffer from this obstructive breathing, and they can have crooked teeth as well, but they are really like the dog version of us. Our faces have been growing the same way. They're highly bred, whereas humans for the last few hundred years have been evolving in this way that is detrimental to our health. So again, I had a hard time believing this, but all I really needed to do was look in the mirror, and there it was, crooked teeth, that backwards growth pattern. So these researchers said, just go look at animals in the wild. So I did. I looked at chimpanzees. They all have perfectly straight teeth. This handsome dude, the Berberath macaque, perfectly straight teeth. Let's go into marine mammals, into the water. All straight teeth. Even my mutt of a dog held her down, perfectly straight teeth. Meanwhile, humans get something like this. About 80 to 90% of us have some sort of malocclusion or crookedness or deformation in our jaw or teeth. And again, if we don't do anything about it, we can end up looking like this. So it turns out that smaller mouths make it harder to breathe through our noses. What happens is the upper palate doesn't fall correctly when we're young. And so that upper palate can push and grow into our sinus cavities and create some obstruction in our noses. So this is what a lot of us look like. But who cares? We have a mouth. Why not breathe through it? I grew up thinking that breathing through the mouth was perfectly fine. And even in adulthood, I was breathing through my mouth all the time, especially when working out. But if you look at the science, you find that mouth breathing is extremely injurious to our health. It affects the way we think. It affects the way our bodies function. It even affects the way we look. So this is a typical profile of someone who spent too long mouth breathing in his youth. So a slightly crooked nose, tired eyes, receding chin, that downward, almost like a melting of the face. And the problem is this profile makes it even harder for these people to get a free breath of air in and out of their bodies. And if you're breathing 20,000 times a day, 25,000 times a day, if you're struggling to do that, it's going to have a downstream effect on your health. So we know all this. We know that mouth breathing is very bad for us. But I went down to Stanford and talked to this guy, Dr. Jayakar Nayak, and he explained to me that, yes, of course, nasal breathing is superior. Of course, mouth breathing is bad for us, but nobody really knew how quickly the damage came on. Did it come on after a few weeks or a few months or a few years? Nobody knew because nobody had tested it. So we put together a little experiment, which me and one other person were to have our noses plugged up for 10 days, and we were to only be breathing through our mouth. And for the other 10 days, we would be breathing almost entirely through our noses, and we were collecting data before and after each of these phases to see what happened. Here we are heading off, 10 days of mouth breathing. Look at that, good times. There we are driving away from Stanford. Not really. This is what happened within a couple of hours of becoming an obligate mouth breather. My blood pressure shot up to stage 2 hypertension. I've never seen my blood pressure this high before in my entire life. When I went to bed that night, here's what happened. So on the left is a baseline of my sleep. So I was snoring about 5 minutes, which was a lot for me. Before the previous days, I was snoring about 2 or 3 minutes or not at all. So within a single night, I started snoring about an hour and a half. Here's what happened about 4 days later. I was snoring about 4 hours through the night. My partner in nasal crime, Anders Olsen, suffered even worse. This was his snoring. This guy had zero snoring before. This is what happens when you mouth breathe. What happened to us when we started mouth breathing? We started getting sleep apnea, which is choking on ourselves. If you can hear that person gasping for air, sounding like he's being strangled to death, that is me. We recorded audio each and every night. My dog started getting so worried that something serious was going on here. So again, this was no real mystery. We know that mouth breathing is associated with obstructive sleep apnea and snoring. The science is very clear about it. It's just how quickly that came on was really shocking to me. So the good part of the study is we got to spend the next 10 days breathing entirely through our noses, or as often as we could. At night, we'd put a little piece of tape on our mouths to keep our mouths shut, so we would just become obligate nasal breathers. This is Anders taking about the 4th blood draw down at Stanford. Not very fun. Here's what happened to my sleeping. So on the left is the first night of nasal breathing. Pretty good improvement for 4 hours at my highest to 28 minutes of very light snoring. A few days later, zero snoring. So that's where I was before on the left. On the right, that was my snoring after. Here is Anders, mouth breathing. Here he is, nasal breathing. We also had our sleep apnea completely disappear to zero apnea events. This is what happened to my blood pressure. Left, blood pressure, mouth breathing. Right is the second day of nasal breathing. This was about the 4th or 5th day of nasal breathing. And this was my blood pressure about 2 days after the nasal breathing phase stopped. And I continued to nasal breathe, practice healthy breathing habits. I don't know anything that can lower blood pressure by 40 points. But breathing did, at least it did for me. So my main interest here wasn't to bum everyone out and do these self-experiments. It was to address the problem of our dysfunctional breathing so that we could find ways of fixing it. And that's what I spent several years doing. I'm going to very quickly take you through some habits that you can adopt, some quick hacks that you can use to breathe better and share in better health. The first one, this seems so simple, breathe through your nose. Breathe through your nose all the time. When you breathe through your nose, you are protecting your body from pathogens. You're filtering air, you're moistening it, you're heating it, you're conditioning it so that by the time it enters your lungs, that air can be so much more easily uploaded to your bloodstream and delivered throughout your body. Our noses are covered in this stuff, cilia, which sway like wheat in a field. It's beautiful stuff. Just by breathing through the nose, you can increase your oxygenation by about 20% more than equivalent breaths through the mouth. That makes a huge difference. Next, breathe slow and breathe steady. So about 20 years ago, some Italian researchers began studying the Ave Maria, the prayer cycle, and they also studied Om Mani Padme Hum, which is an ancient Buddhist mantra. And they found that to recite both of these prayers required about 5 to 6 breaths per minute, which is about 5 to 6 seconds to recite the prayer and then 5 to 6 seconds to inhale. And they found that when people breathe this way, something amazing happened. Their heart rate lowered, their baroreceptor sensitivity increased significantly, blood pressure decreased, oxygen to the brain increased, and more and more. These are some of the data that came out from that study. And something else amazing happened. The systems of the body entered something called coherence, where everything is working at peak efficiency. That chart above shows what our waves look like. And by waves, I mean our blood pressure waves, our EEGs, our circulation, our heart rate. This is what it looks like when we're not paying attention to our breath, when we're frustrated, when we're talking too much. Below is that state of coherence that I was talking about. So it turns from this to this. Dr. Richard Brown at Columbia has been studying this stuff for 20 years. He uses this simple breathing technique, about 5 to 6 seconds in, 5 to 6 seconds out. He uses this for his patients with anxiety, depression, and more. You can try it right now. You can follow along with this animation and breathe in and breathe out. If you like, you can breathe this way for the rest of this presentation, and you'll notice this calm coming over your body. What that is you are sending signals to your brain, to different areas, the piriform cortex, hypothalamus, amygdala, to calm yourself. You can actually take control of emotional centers of your brain just by breathing. Rule number 3, breathe less. So we're growing more and more overweight. A lot of us know that, but few of us realize that we're also breathing too much. Most of us breathe well over our metabolic needs. And when we're doing that, we're using energy, we're exerting our body in ways that can really break it down after a while. Patrick McEwen, you may have heard of him, a breathing therapist in Ireland, has been working on this stuff for 20 years. He sent me this chart. And you can look at the difference here. Breathing at a rate of about 20 breaths per minute, you get about 50% efficiency. But if you were to slow down those breaths to about 6 times a minute, you get about 85% efficiency. By efficiency, I mean that is the alveolar ventilation happening. So that is gas exchange, more oxygen with fewer and lighter breaths. So there's something else that was very interesting to me about all this is you can use slow breathing to take control of panic and asthma. That's what Dr. Alicia Moret at Southern Methodist University did. Here is this fantastic study in which she brought a bunch of panic sufferers and just taught them how to breathe more slowly. And this is what happened. So about 62% within 2 months had no panic attacks. 68% after that, no panic attacks a year later. So these are not insignificant numbers. These people were very much improved or much improved even a year after just by using their breathing. She did the same thing with asthmatics, same results. Incredible stuff. So the last thing I want to very quickly talk about is awareness. This is the most important thing when it comes to breathing. So we may not be able to take conscious control of our livers or kidneys or hearts or stomachs, but when we take control of our breathing, we can impact and affect all of these areas. So we can change our circulation, we can change our heart rate, we can even take control of the aspects of our immune functions. I spent years digging into research, finding people who did just this. In the 1950s, this guy, Carl Stow, a vocal teacher, he went on to teach people at the Met Opera, the opera singers, how to sing better. He also went on to the VA hospitals along the East Coast to teach emphysemics how to breathe better, to really have a complete transformative effect on these people. Nothing else was working for them. This is an emphysemic breathing. That's his neck right there. You're going to see his stomach next. So these people had lost not all, but most diaphragmatic movement. And so each breath for them was a struggle. Just by teaching these people how to breathe properly, Stow was able to greatly rehabilitate them. This is that patient just a few weeks after learning how to breathe, no drugs, no anything else. And at the end here, you're going to see him again. You're going to see some before and after pictures. There's no Photoshop involved here. There's no other interventions except breath. That's him before. This is him after. Another thing that I discovered is you can use breathing to heat your body up. This sounds crazy. This guy, Naropa, was talking about this 1,000 years ago. This woman, Alexandra David Neil, a Belgian French anarchist opera singer who spent 14 years in the Himalayas, learned how to do it. No one believed it until Herbert Benson at the Harvard Medical School went and studied these people, these Tumo monks, and found that just breathing, you could increase the heat in your extremities by 17 degrees. So this allowed these people to stay in the snow using nothing but their breath to heat their bodies up. Incredible stuff. Wim Hof, I'm sure you've heard of him by now. Incredible guy. He can sit in ice for almost 2 hours and consciously control the temperature of his body, his core temperature. This was supposed to be scientifically impossible, but Wim's done it, and so have so many of the people that he's taught. So it just shows you that the human potential is yet to be really known, really defined. And people like Wim, people like Alexander David Neal and Stow are all helping to move this thing forward and helping to show just all the miraculous things we can do with our natural bodies. This stuff has been around for thousands of years. Ancient Hindus were talking about it. Ancient Chinese were talking about it. There's a quote from the Tao that reads, "Therefore, the scholar who nourishes his life refines the form and nourishes his breath." Isn't this evident? I think that's becoming more evident now. A quick search on PubMed, the National Library of Medicine, shows about 46,000 references of studies, so many of them showing all of the transformative effects that can happen just by taking control of your breathing. So how we breathe really is a missing pillar of health. And when we take control of it, when we learn it, when we appreciate it, we can help blunt, or in some miraculous cases, get rid of entirely so many chronic conditions. I can only hope that this time we won't soon forget it. Thank you very much for listening. Be well and breathe well.
Welcome, James. I hope you can hear the applause in this room at the Breakers, where we definitely wish you were with us. Thank you so much for that, and welcome Anna Bjurström in Sweden. James, that was fantastic. And I'm sure we have questions everywhere, so Anna, we'll start with you while I scour the room here.
All right. So, question is there a way one can measure your own quality of breath?
Of course you can. You can do it with so many wearable technologies nowadays. It's very easy. With the pulse oximeter, you can look at your blood pressure, you can look at your heart rate variability, and all of these measures can give you a general gauge on how you're breathing, especially heart rate variability. It's miraculous what happens after just a few minutes of breathing in a healthy pattern. You can really see huge improvements.
5.5 seconds in, 5.5 seconds out. Correct?
You know, I put that in the book, but then I got some notes of people saying, what if I'm a half a second off? You know, is that?
Then you're doomed.
Wow. Okay. This is an estimate, people. Anything in that general ballpark is going to have a lot of benefits for you.
Another one? So,
go ahead, Anna. You can go ahead. Oh.
Why is this good? For sleeping.
Well, that is good because it forces you to keep your mouth shut at night, and it forces you to breathe through your nose. And when we breathe through the nose, I won't rehash everything I just virtually said to all of you there a few minutes ago, but we are allowing our bodies to process air so much more efficiently, about 20% more oxygen. That's how much we get breathing through our nose than equivalent breaths through the mouth. And at night, if you're like me and you have this weaker jawline, you can go to sleep like this, and you're going to be more apt to snore and even suffer from sleep apnea. So simply closing your mouth at night can really have some huge benefits.
And this is, according to you, the best way to tape your mouth, right? If you want to do that seriously.
Whatever works for you is fine by me. There are various ways of doing this. Some people like a big strip. Some people like Somnifix strips. Some people like to use a chin strap. And, you know, I have no preference for the rest of you. I found that just a teeny little piece of hypoallergenic tape, which has this very easy adhesive right at the center of my lips, tends to work great. But whatever floats your boat is fine.
We've got a question for you here, James. Go ahead.
Hi, James. With us, with the pandemic and wearing masks all day, what do you recommend that we're getting enough deep breaths and good oxygen intake?
So I should put a big caveat out here. I am not a doctor or a breathing therapist. I'm a journalist who went out into the world and talked with all these people for years and years. And luckily, I did glean some tidbits of information. What I've seen with mask wearing is a lot of people are saying, I'm wearing this mask all day. There's no way I'm getting enough oxygen. I feel anxious. I feel crazy. But from what I've seen from the studies, oxygen is not the problem. And if you don't believe that, you can get a pulse oximeter and you can look at your oxygen throughout the day. What we're responding to is an increase of carbon dioxide, because carbon dioxide is the thing, not oxygen, that stimulates the need to breathe. So if we all exhale now and hold your breath, you're going to feel that need to breathe, that paranoia. That's from rising levels of CO2. It has nothing to do with the amount of oxygen in your bloodstream.
Anybody here?
All right, I'll
Oh, go ahead, Anna.
come in with a question if that's okay.
Yes, sure.
Dr. Claudia, neuroscientists are asking, in the light of COVID-19 causing silent hypoxia, often before the person is short of breath, are there effective specific exercises for protection against COVID-19 this flu season?
Pulse oximeter is the best thing that you could possibly use, because with this silent hypoxia, what they're finding is these people are going into the hospital with these extraordinarily low levels of oxygen, like 60%, which most of us, when we're healthier, 95% plus. And so a pulse oximeter is really the truest way to look at how your blood sats are.
Is there another question here in the room? Yes. Hang on a sec. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Tracy. I'm a physiotherapist, and I've studied breathing a bit, and we use something called a capno trainer, which measures your CO2 level. And I'm wondering if you encountered that, because that is a very effective way to measure someone's CO2 level and know if they have a breathing dysfunction.
Capno trainers, capnometers are fantastic. For COVID, they're less effective because it's usually an oxygen problem, not a CO2 problem. If you're looking at people with asthma, if you're looking at people with anxiety or panic problems, then capno trainers are great. And what they're doing is they're looking at the amount of exhaled carbon dioxide coming out of you. What they found with these populations of people who have asthma and anxiety, they tend to breathe too much. So they tend to breathe like this, and they off-gas too much CO2. So their CO2 levels are very, very low. And the work that I wrote about in the book Breath with Dr. Justin Feinstein at Laureate Institute of Brain Research, he believes that so many mental problems, fear-based disorders, like anxiety, like panic, could have a physical link to them. So he believes that these could be tied directly to breathing. So capnometers are a good way to diagnose some problems and a good way to help treat them, because you can show people very clearly that they aren't losing oxygen by breathing slowly. In some cases, they're actually gaining it. And this helps reestablish some confidence in the therapies and allows them to breathe slower, more in line with their metabolic needs.
We have another question. I'm sorry. We have another question over here.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Peggy. Thank you, James. I loved your book. I'm a yogi from way back, and one of the greatest techniques that I find really helpful is Shitali breathing, which is not all nasal. So I'm just curious your opinion about the exhalation through the nose and making the exhalation longer.
For sure. When you're doing exercises, if you're doing Sudarshan Kriya, if you're doing Wim Hof method, if you're doing other pranayamas, a lot of those have you exhale through the mouth. Some even have you inhale through the mouth. So there's a big difference between chronic and habitual breathing and practices. If you're doing a practice that takes 20 minutes and has you exhaling through the mouth or even inhaling through it, that's no problem. So what I was talking about in the book is habitual breathing. So the reason why so many of these practices have you inhale or exhale through the mouth is because they're having you breathe. They're purposely having you breathe more to elicit more of a sympathetic response, so you can understand what that stressful response feels like, so you can be better able to control it. But the reason why this is so effective is so for the other 23 and a half hours of the day, you're chill. You're breathing through the nose. You're breathing slowly. I was just talking to Wim Hof about this, because a lot of people have written and said, Wim Hof breathes through his mouth. He doesn't for the other 23 and a half hours a day. He's breathing through his nose, and he's breathing very slowly.
We're actually out of time, but I'm going to go for one more question, Anna, if you've got one there. And James will be back later with Wim Hof, as a matter of fact. So that's coming up still.
Well, let's talk about something positive here. And as you know, I did a study with your friend Anders about 8 years ago about endurance training and taping my mouth. And the results were astonishing. 30% less lactic acid, increased endurance. So if we're into fitness, are you saying that we should do nose breathing even if we run a marathon, if we can?
I believe so. And I think that the science is very clear on that. The reason why people are so put off by this is because it's awful when you first try to switch. If you've been a habitual mouth breather for 30 years and you suddenly need to breathe through your nose, you're like, I can't get enough air in my nose. My performance is going down. Why would I want to do this? But if you take a long view of this, the science is very clear. Dr. John Douillard has studied this stuff for 40 years and found that once you switch to nasal breathing, your performance is likely to go up, your recovery time is going to be cut in half, and you're going to be able to perform longer and stronger than you would otherwise. So yeah, it's not too fun at the beginning, but after you get the hang of it, you can really reap some big rewards.